me and my team, we essentially act like their campaigns and communications and public affairs strategy team, parachuting around that person to help them know what will come next and how they can use their power to create change. But first of all, I want to start off about me and tell you a little personal story. So I was born in Lancashire and grew up in a very Asian community in Leicester. And when I was around 8 years old, my dad picked us up and moved us to a really white working class village in South Derbyshire. See, my parents, both immigrants, had been working day and night in factories, textiles factories, trying to make a living. Dad had a degree, but couldn't really find any work that was actually equitable to that degree, and so was forced to work in factories. And they were quite determined that this wasn't going to be their life, and they scrambled some money together and managed to find to get us a shop, a newsagent's, in this village in South Derbyshire. And I have a quite vivid memory of the early, kind of that first year of moving there, when my mum took me and my younger sister to the doctor's surgery to get us registered. I remember it quite vividly. Mum was wearing her sari because she was still wearing the clothes that she felt comfortable in. We were fresh in this village, and they're the clothes that Mum wore back in Leicester quite comfortably. And we walked into this local doctor's surgery, and she asked if she could get her daughters registered. And the receptionist looked at her and asked her to repeat herself. And so my mum said again, "Can I get my girls registered?" And the receptionist asked her to repeat herself. And so she said it again, and it went on like this a few times before the receptionist turned to me and said, "I don't understand what she's saying. Can't she speak English?" And that was quite I think the reason that is kind of imprinted in me is that, you know, first of all, memories are exacerbated by emotions. And I think that was quite an emotional experience for me to be a child and be pulled into the humiliation of my mum. You see, Mum had a thick Indian accent. Mum and Dad, like thousands of immigrants in the 70s, had come over to the UK. Mum's from Uganda, Dad from India. And they'd come over because of colonial rule, because the British Empire had existed quite prominently in India and Uganda. And after the Indians were booted out of Uganda, they were invited to the UK. There was a shortage of health workers in the UK, and around that time, 40% of junior doctors and around 30% of nurses were immigrants. But when they arrived, they got a few surprises. One was the cold. They looked freezing in that picture. And so you have these aunties doubling up like really thick cardigans over their saris. But the second was the environment that they were faced with when they arrived. You see, on the one hand, the UK government was saying, "Come to our country, we need you, we want you, you're one of us." But the reception they got was very, very hostile. Lots of propaganda, because these immigrants were propping up the health sector, but really there was a myth going around that they were going to flood the country, they were going to take over. Fast forward a few decades, and it doesn't feel like much has changed. When I think about this, it doesn't really surprise me, because when you look around and you look at the institutions that are dominating, that shape our society, they're predominantly run by the same people who went to the same schools, same universities, and socialized in the same circles. There are more men called John in the FTSE 100 boards than there are women. And so it doesn't really seem surprising that we've got a society that doesn't feel entirely welcome and does feel hostile to some marginal groups. But it doesn't have to be that way. And I'm going to tell you why it doesn't have to be that way by talking about tampons. You see, we desperately need diversity of thought in the people that are shaping our society. Because diversity leads to thinking outside the box. You know, the way I might design a public service will be completely different to the way you might design that public service, to the way that you might design that public service. And together, we can shape a service that is welcome and usable for all groups. So, this is Laura Corrigan. I met Laura in 2015 when she started a petition. She was at university. She wouldn't have called herself political then as well, which is, I think, notable when you hear her journey. She was in her bedroom. She had exams coming up. She wanted to find a distraction. And she started Googling and she found out that the tampon tax existed. The women were being charged a VAT on their sanitary products. So she was like, oh, that's interesting. You know, that we're being taxed for that, so we're paying a bit extra. Then she found out that things like Jaffa cakes and tea cakes were not taxed because they were seen as essential items. And she couldn't believe it. So flabbergasted, she started a petition on change.org. She shared it with her friends on social media. Her friends panicked and said, which module is this for? Do I need to start a petition? She was like, no, it's okay, just share the petition, please. And then I came across it. Now, Laura would not have called herself political. She was just shocked, angry, bemused. And she thought, this is crazy, someone needs to do something about this. Now, it's important to note that feminists have been campaigning to scrap the tampon tax for decades. But Laura had come along at this really interesting moment in time, in history, in activism, where she had the tools of the internet at her disposal. So she had sites like change.org and Twitter and Facebook, where she was able to say something and then be able to share it. And then that something was shared across not only her campus, but across the country. See, I came across that campaign because people from my home village were sharing it on my social media. Laura's campaign started taking off. So it burst out of that kind of filter bubble of, maybe students or people living in cities. And that's when you know that something's really, really taking off, because it kind of bursts out of those filter bubbles. Because what was really happening was people finding out about this fact and this issue for the first time through coming across their campaign. And that's also interesting, that often we find out about news through these kind of public demonstrations and campaigns. And so people they found out what was happening, they found out about the tampon tax, they wanted to take action, and so they were able to sign the petition and join Laura's army that she was slowly building. Within months, that petition grew to 100,000 people. But she didn't just leave it there, because a petition is not just a petition. If it's just those signatures, if it's just that number, then it will just, it will die a death. It doesn't get, nothing really happens. But she mobilized that community. She was asking her supporters, what should we do next? What can you do in your local area to try and make a difference, to try and make a point about this? And so she started hearing about people who had signed her campaign, who were doing really, really interesting things. It was around Christmas time, and a group of feminists in a local community started decorating their Christmas tree with tampons. Because they were like, if this is a luxury item, then, okay, I can decorate my Christmas tree with this. They were sharing photos. Laura was sharing that out to her whole community. Another small group of comedians did a spoof of Taylor Swift's Bad Blood, addressing the song to George Osborne, telling him to end the tampon tax. And Laura's approach was really exciting because, unlike people who have institutionally, held power, she was giving out her power. She was really generous with her power. She had this incredible platform, but it was not just her campaign. She would always go out to her community saying, we are doing this next, what should we do? If there was a profile about her in the Telegraph, she would say, we're in the Telegraph. And if you meet Laura, that is who she is, because she found herself in charge of this power inadvertently. Also, the female campaigners that we tend to work with do have a tendency to support each other and be real allies to each other. They're very good at distributing the power that they hold, perhaps because they haven't historically held it. And so Laura's campaign grew and grew and grew. a female MP in Parliament, Paula Sheriff, old MP now, contacted Laura saying, I love what you're doing, I want to help you campaign. So you had these two incredible women, one who had, by this point, 200,000, 300,000 supporters of the public who wanted to end the tampon tax, the other who had access to hundreds of MPs in Parliament. And they worked as a tag team. Whenever Paula tabled a debate in Parliament, Laura would mobilise her hundreds of thousands of people, members of the public, to get their local MPs to attend the debate. And we had MPs saying in Parliament, I'm here because people in my constituency want me to be here. But they did something even better. They got this guy to say the word tampon in Parliament. What was incredible, there was this amazing debate that happened around that time that you should look up, where male MPs could not say the word. They couldn't say the word tampon or sanitary products. And there's this amazing moment where Stella Creasy refuses to sit down until they actually say the word and around us. But of course, these men would not have brought the issue of tampons and periods into Parliament. You know, it's laughable that they couldn't say that word, but it says a lot about the fact that marginal groups and their needs often are sidelined. So Laura's campaign continued. It got brought into the issue of the general election, and one by one, every single political party committed to ending the tampon tax. She had this really bizarre, stressful moment where UKIP had come out to support the tampon tax, and she wasn't really quite sure what to do with that, how she should react. We had this crisis call saying, what should you do? Should you reject it? Because it got tied up into the issue of the EU and Brexit. Then when the Conservative government came into power, they committed to ending the tampon tax. George Osborne actually said during the autumn budget that because of Laura's campaign, they would be putting an end to this tax, working with the EU to do that. And then last week, we finally got a commitment from the UK government that by the end of this year and the beginning of next year, the tampon tax will be completely scrapped. But before they did that, it was generated by the tampon tax that would go towards women and girls. And every year, if you were a grassroots organisation that represented women and girls, you could apply for some of that funding. And so this student who was trying to distract herself from her exams ended up creating a £15 million fund and scrapping the tampon tax. And then during the process of her campaign, she'd inspired other young women. Amika George got in touch with Laura when she was campaigning. Amika was 16 at the time and said, I want to get involved, what can I do? And this always happens with our incredible petition starters, because what they're doing is relatable and it doesn't feel scary and it doesn't feel like it's over there where power is held. It feels really accessible. So Amika got in touch with Laura and said, how can I get involved? And at the time, we found out about the issue of period poverty and the fact that 1 in 10 girls in the UK were skipping schools because they didn't have access to period products. So Amika started a campaign to call for period poverty to be ended and for all schools to have access to sanitary products for free. So you didn't have, a young girl who was scared to speak to her mum and dad about it. Maybe they couldn't afford the provisions and would end up skipping school as a result. Amika's campaign, grew instantaneously because Laura threw her power behind Amika. Within a few months, Amika held a demonstration outside 10 Downing Street, and around 2,000 young girls turned up, and they were angry, and they were excited, and they were all calling for period poverty to end. And I'd never been to a demonstration like it. Most demonstrations tend to be dominated by, the usual suspects. They tend to be very, very dominated by white people, by men, but this was just all young girls, and it was so empowering and exciting. A few months later, Philip Hammond says that he will be creating a provision so that all secondary schools had access to period products. But that wasn't enough for Amika, so she went back to her supporters and said, we're not taking this as victory, we want it to be for all primary schools too. They carried on pushing, and within a few weeks, the Treasury agreed that it would be primary schools too. So, without these two girls, the issue of tampons and periods would just not have been on the agenda. They elbowed their way on. Without people power and these individuals campaigning, Google Maps wouldn't have wheelchair accessible maps. We wouldn't have local authorities addressing the issue of autism care by creating provisions that were desperately needed until the parents had to campaign loudly for that to happen. We wouldn't have had an incredible movement of plastics being reduced by corporations and governments. But why should these people have to shout so loudly to be heard? Now, I guess my call to action to everybody in this room is to open those doors. If you're gatekeepers, bash down that gate so that young people, people of colour, people with disabilities, women are able to speak up, and that they're side by side you when you're designing policies, when you're creating services. Because we won't see the society that we want until that happens. Julie was saying earlier, that there's been a wane in trust to politicians, and that's the case with charities as well. Trust in charities by the public has never been lower. Democracy is really, really suffering. Polarization, hate crime is on the rise. We'll only really fix these problems when we have a real diversity of thought at the heart of our institutions and people with lived experiences side by side creating these services. And until that happens, Laura and Amika and lots of other incredible individuals will have platforms like ours to bang on the door. But I hope it won't for that too long. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I told you it was worth coming back from coffee. That was excellent. Okay, so we have some questions coming through on Slido. So, how do you feel when a campaign you fundamentally disagree with gains lots of momentum?
Yeah, good question. So I was saying actually to someone earlier that, we have hundreds of people starting petitions on our site every single day. And for me, it's a real privilege to see that because I get a real idea of how the public feel about issues. It kind of feels like we're seeing a real temperature check of society and what public mood is. At the moment, we've had such an interesting array of petitions about coronavirus. When we had that spate of terrorist attacks in 2017, it was a really, really tough time. It was around when Grenfell was happening as well. And, it felt like real dark days in the UK. But when I thought that, you might think in those times that you'd see a rise in people calling, a rise in hate, really, kind of like hate-fueled campaigns. But we didn't see that. We saw people calling for solidarity for the victims of those attacks, calling for the unsung heroes of the Manchester attack. And to me, that says that when the chips were down, actually people are incredible, and that we should listen to them. There are campaigns that get started that I don't agree with, but I think that's great, that we shouldn't all agree. And that kind of goes back to the point in my talk that, we don't always all have to agree, but we actually do need to hear the views of the people that we disagree with. If it's hate, then we pull it down. And we check the site regularly to make sure that, that people are complying.
So you sort of moderate some of the campaigns or a certain thing.
So it's not pre-moderated, which I think is really important that, if you're angry about something, you're able to use your phone and start something straight away, and you're not blocked. We're not gatekeepers. But what we do is you can flag content on the site that comes to our policy team, and then we work together to try and assess whether or not something should come down. Okay. And we do that regularly.
Okay, the audience obviously feels they're in need of a bit of TLC. Tell us why you love local government. It doesn't always feel the most loved sector, so pour the love out.
I do. So I started out working for UK Youth Parliament, where we were working with young people who'd been elected by young people in their local areas. And I saw so much incredible youth work happening on a local level across the country, which sadly is being chipped away at. But I think local government, there's a real opportunity to build community. And I think community is desperately needed at the moment. I think we're all starved of it. So I think you've got a real opportunity to build community at a local level, but also you've got the opportunity to make real change. Westminster feels very, very far away. Global politics can feel very far away, but local government, you could potentially shape the way that your local community works, and you can see it directly. So I think that the opportunity for change is really, is a lot higher there.
Do you think there's anything that local government councils can learn from a platform like Change.org in terms of how you mobilise people behind a vision of social change?
I mean, one thing I would say is that don't wait for people to come to you. Go to the places that they are, both online and offline. Often the voices that you actually really need to hear from won't either know how to come to you or won't feel brave enough to come to you. I know because I was there. We were one of those families that just didn't know how to access local government to get the help that we needed. I grew up in quite a racist environment, and it took us a really long time to get the support we needed. So I would just say, use Change.org to look at what's being started in your area, to see what people are campaigning about, and then get in touch with me, and we can link you up to those people.
Great. There's a question here. I'll come back to that one in a sec, but there's an interesting question here which I think actually plays into the answer you just gave. Is there a common feature, do you think, to campaigns that really grab people's imagination and take off? Because I think for people here who may be trying to mobilise communities, that's an important insight, really.
Yeah, I would say, so we came onto the scene and really catapulted the scene in the UK because the charity sector had become a lot more corporate and quite shiny and faceless. And I think people really struggled to connect to those issues because it had become more shiny and corporate. And I think what platforms like Change do is they're just really raw, authentic. You can find stories of underdogs all over the UK on Change.org. And at the heart of that is people with lived experiences telling their story. And so I really think that if you want to reach out to your local community, reach out to those individuals who have experienced housing problems and have them side by side you, developing the campaigns, the policy, the services that you want to work on, because their voice is actually really, really powerful to engage more people in the community.
A couple more questions. You've said that passion can't be taught.
Yeah.
But obviously one of the things that a lot of councils and the wider public sector that are interested in community power is they're trying to, in some ways, teach passion or at least mobilise passion. How can you do that if you can't actually teach passion? Because
passion is there. You don't need to teach it. You don't need to give people permission to be passionate. They are passionate. They just need to be heard. I said that in my book, so I'm going to plug my book. It's called Do Something. And I say that in the book because you can learn strategy, you can learn the tools, learn how to use the tools that you need to create change. But the reason I say that in the book is that actually people do feel passionate, and that's kind of me reassuring the reader that don't worry about all that jargon and the decision makers and the media. Just know that if you're passionate, you can actually create change. And every single petition starter, most of the petition starters we work with have just never done this before, but they're so passionate about the issue that they care about, and that's what wins it. It's not, we then just give them the frameworks that they need to use.
Final question. You highlighted some really successful campaigns, but there are thousands of campaigns that really don't go anywhere, but they may well be causes just as as worthy as the causes you've highlighted. What can be done to allow a wider range of petitions and campaigns to have an impact and generate change?
So I think it's a myth that your petition has to be really big to create change. I always kind of reassure petition starters that you don't need 100,000 signatures. It's what you do with that community that really, really matters. And that's just about good campaign strategy and good campaign planning. I think, there are a host of campaigns out there, big and small. Most of the campaigns, the average number of signatures that a campaign has that goes on to win is 200 signatures. just 200, not 200,000, 200. It's just that we hear about the ones that got hundreds and thousands on the national media. We tried to pitch a story yesterday and to the Guardian, and they said there's not enough numbers on the petition for them to write about it, which is a shame. And I think we're going to move away from that. I think that they'll start realizing that actually, people don't. It doesn't really matter. It's about the campaign and the person's story. But yeah, and I think that it just depends on who your decision maker is and how you use your supporters to influence them.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. A brilliant way to end the day. Thank you. Right, we made it. My notes, which have been provided by the team, now say that my job is to mingle and make nice, which I shall endeavour to do. I'll do my best. I shall be mingling and making nice in that room there at the end, where we will be serving cocktails and drinks and soft drinks as well if you want. Please do attend. We will be sending out an email to everyone who's attended, just asking what you thought of the day. So please do, very easy to fill in. Please do return that. Really useful to us to know how we can make this event even better next year. And then finally, I just want to say a few words of thanks before you shoot off and grab a drink. Firstly, enormous thanks to our many partners who have made this day possible. Very, very grateful to them. Thank you to the City of London for hosting this event in this absolutely astounding room. Very importantly, huge thanks to the fabulous NLGN. I know it's a difficult acronym to say, but I should be able to say it. Fabulous new local government network staff for all their work today. Particular thanks to Rich and Francesca, who have worked incredibly hard to make this day as successful as it is. Huge thanks to our fabulous lineup of speakers, who I think have been absolutely amazing, really, really inspirational set of speakers. But final thanks to all of you. The day is as much as possible about participation, networking, interaction, and you've really embraced that spirit, both in the questions you put forward to the speakers, but also the role that you played in the breakout session. So give yourself an enormous round of applause. You've done a great job. Join us for a drink, have a safe journey home, and stay healthy. Thank you.